follow it through exegetically. And at that point, and this is why it's good to hang out with Gene, he'll always tell me of the possible counter-arguments. And I think for about 5-10 minutes you play devil's advocate. And you said, no, this is what an Amyraldian is going to say at this point. This is what an Armenian is going to say at this point. So we had a good conversation, and I think we're going to attempt to do that again this morning. So if we go back and forth, it's not because Gene is just trying to be disagreeable. It's just we're trying to prove that Hebrews 10 is another key text that we can appeal to.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that this show has enabled me to do is realize that I need to be very careful with what I say, because we have people listening.
Right.
We've got a lot of people listening.
Yes.
And I can't just throw out these empty assertions without, and I did this in the beginning thinking, it's kind of interesting, my view of how much I knew back in 2003. I thought, I knew a lot about Reformed theology. And then as I began to teach and make certain statements and use certain verses, our listeners would challenge me, send me emails and say, hey, you know what, you said this, but this verse doesn't fit with that, and now you've got this problem. And I was like, wow. So what it caused me to do was be a lot more careful with what I was saying and what I was teaching, which is a good thing.
Yes, it's a good thing.
All right, so where would you like to begin reading in Hebrews 10?
I thought if we pick it up at verse 9 of Hebrews 10, and then we'll read down to verse 14, and then we'll go into hopefully some exegetical interpretation of what this passage is stating. So begin at verse 9. It says, "Then he said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God." So this is Christ referring to fulfilling God's will. "He taketh away the old," which is the first covenant, "to establish the second," which is the new covenant. Verse 10, "By the which will we are sanctified, through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. And every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, from henceforth expecting to his enemies be made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever them that are sanctified." So this is the climax, if you will, of the theology of the Atonement in the book of Hebrews. He's talked about how Christ and his atonement work is superior to the Old Covenant, superior to that of angels, superior to that of even Joshua, and all those Old Testament types and shadows finds its substance and fulfillment in the atonement work of Christ and his high priestly office that he entered into when he sat down, as verse 13 says. So verse 12, at the right hand of God. But getting back to verse 10, this is what I want to focus in on here. And for further study, if I don't help you this morning, which is a possibility, I recommend you go to aomin.org and look at James White's article on Hebrews 10 pertaining to this passage. It was certainly very helpful for me, and he really lays it out exegetically and does an excellent job in that regard. But in verse 10, you notice that it says, "By which will," which is God's will, "we have been sanctified." And in the Greek, this is perfect tense, completed tense. So it's an event that took place in the past that is now completed.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have been sanctified.
And this would this be true of an unbeliever? If an unbeliever was to pick this up and he happened to be one of the elect, but he didn't know it,
If you just
was he sanctified? Or see, the argument that I was making is that Paul is writing this as a believer to the Hebrew church who are believers. And so he could say to them, by this will we have been sanctified. In other words, we Christians, we believers have been sanctified.
Right.
Through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all.
So does it apply to elect people who are yet to be converted?
Yeah.
I would say yes.
I mean, because even though it's in the past tense,
yes,
and it speaks of a completed action,
yes,
I think it can only be said by those who are elect.
Yes.
I'm sorry, not even those who are elect, those who have been regenerated, those who have been born again.
Yeah. When I'm saying in the context here, it definitely seems to be redemption accomplished, not so much redemption applied. And as we read down this passage, hopefully that will become apparent as we follow the train of thought that the writer of Hebrews has. It's talking about it in comparison to the Old Testament that happened time and time again. Each year there were sacrifices, each day there were sacrifices, but this sacrifice is once and for all. So you notice if you continue to read, we have that. It says in verse 11, "And every priest standeth daily, ministering in oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins." Verse 12, "But this man, after he had offered up one sacrifice for sins forever," so this again is accomplished. He offered up his body for the sacrifice of God's people once, forever. It says, "sat down at the right hand of God." This is again context of accomplishment. He has accomplished the atoning work, and now he is sat down at the right hand of God. And that speaks of his finished work. He enters into that rest and now serves as our great high priest. "From henceforth, expecting to all his enemies and made his footstool." And then verses 14 to 16 really put the bookend on it and really conclude the argument concerning particular redemption. "For by one offering he is perfected forever all those that are sanctified." And who are those who are sanctified? Well, verse 15 and 16 gives us that group.
Okay, but
Yeah.
once again, if he's speaking as a believer,
Yes.
two fellow believers,
Right.
he's not speaking to unbelievers. Verse 14, for by one offering he has perfected for all time those who are sanctified.
Right.
This was,
So the context is still the atonement.
is this sanctification in the Ordo Salutis sense?
No. I think that is useful in systematic theology when we're discussing the Ordo Salutis, and that's that process that takes place after justification. But this is more to do with the context is what did Christ accomplish at the cross? The context is clearly, in my understanding, the accomplishment rather than the application, which would be
The order of restored.
yes, the order as a Historia Salutis, the Historia Salutis and Ordo Salutis. Yeah, sometimes I get those back to front, but I believe it's the Historia Salutis. We're looking now at what was accomplished in redemptive history.
That's right.
Yeah, and then we have a reference to his ascension. Again, that's accomplished. He doesn't keep on ascending into heaven. He ascended once. The sacrifice was once and for all. So I think it's next to impossible to escape the accomplishment of this context. You know, that it's speaking of what he achieved for his people upon the cross. And then verse 14, after we have waiting for his enemies to be made his footstool, so it's already a done deal from the perspective of heaven, from the perspective of Christ. We have by one offering he's perfected forever them that are sanctified, referring back to the same group. And if there was any doubt to which group this is referring to, verse 15 and verse 16 I believe clearly state that it's referring to the entirety of the people of God when it says, "Wherefore the Holy Ghost also is a witness to us, for after he said before, this is the covenant I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts and into their minds, and I will write them in their hearts, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more." Now where remissions of these is, there is no more offering for sin. So I think this is clearly in context looking at what was accomplished.
Yeah, I don't know though, because remission doesn't take place. Remission is something that happens in the Ordo Salutis.
Right. Yes, so in other words, the application of that remission of sins does not take place until a person repents in time and space, if you will, and places their faith in the finished work of Christ. But it was always ready to be applied to them. You know, the people of God, as Hebrews 13:12 says, was sanctified outside the city gate of Christ. So if you go to Hebrews 13, and again I want you to look at this and scrutinize this as you've been doing. In verse 12 it says, "Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate." So when did he sanctify the people with his own blood? I would say in context here at the cross.
That's good.